Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today springs from the philosophy laid out in The Buy Nothing Rebellion, financial freedom. It's a pretty potent idea, really. The material basically champions this path to, well, liberation through a kind of radical, almost unwavering refusal of consumer culture. It frames every dollar you don't spend as a deliberate vote for autonomy. So the question we're digging into is this. To get that genuine financial freedom, that real peace of mind they talk about, do you actually have to systematically reject all the modern conveniences, the status symbols, the consumption habits the rebellion outlines? My stance is yes, that systematic refusal is pretty much essential. Because modern consumption, I'd argue, is really built on a kind of financial conditioning meant to keep us dependent.
Okay. I see it a bit differently. Look, I completely embrace the end goal, that profound independence, but I question whether that blanket, systematic rejection is truly necessary, or even the most efficient way. My position is that real freedom comes not necessarily from mandatory austerity, but through, let's say, highly strategic, really intentional use of resources. Sometimes, actually, acquiring a specific convenience or even certain assets can maximize your most valuable resource, time. And that, arguably, speeds up the path to independence, making that kind of wholesale rejection maybe inefficient.
Well, the material really grounds its philosophy in escaping that cycle, the earn, spend, owe cycle. It identifies specific consumption traps and argues they aren't just accidental. They're mechanisms specifically designed to keep people, as it puts it, broke and dependent. I mean, just look at car ownership. The call to reject new cars averaging, over $50,000 now, that's presented as crucial. Why? Because the debt, the huge monthly payment, $600-700 or more, that creates a kind of modern indentured servitude. Your transport immediately becomes this massive liability, a depreciating trophy. And this is amplified by the whole status game. The material goes into detail about how designer clothes, fancy watches, the constant need to upgrade, it encourages people to appear wealthy rather than be wealthy, right? It fundamentally confuses just spending money, the activity, with actual progress, which is building equity.
So, the act of saying no, of refusing, like opting out of the upgrade trap, it's not presented as deprivation. It's framed as a conscious, necessary act of rebellion. You need to take back control and choose the life you genuinely want, not the one marketed to you.
Okay, I wholeheartedly agree with the diagnosis there. True wealth is often owned quietly. And financing big-ticket luxuries, whether it's the shiny new car or the fancy vacation on credit, that usually ends in a financial hangover. That definitely hinders your autonomy. No argument there. However, where I think the rebellion's mandate falls short is by overlooking a really key economic idea: intelligent resource allocation. If we treat time as capital, and let's face it, it's the only capital we truly can't renew, then using certain conveniences intentionally can actually be the most rational financial move. The rebellion tends to dismiss, say, paid food delivery as just lazy inflation. Okay, maybe sometimes it is. But what if the hour you save by strategically using that service lets you focus on a side project, bringing in significantly more money, or maybe it just preserves the mental bandwidth you need for making complex decisions in your main career? In that case, the expense isn't a trap. It's arguably a calculated investment. So the focus shouldn't be blanket rejection, but rather getting really clear. Does this spending decision, even on tech or a service, proactively build wealth or preserve essential energy? Or is it just passive submission to conditioning? That's the key distinction for me.
That's a compelling point about time's value, definitely. But I think you might be sort of missing the forest for the trees when it comes to the sheer weight of debt, especially with cars. The material really highlights the freedom you get from driving a reliable, paid-off older car. The 2007 Toyota Camry is their go-to example, right? That car provides essentially all the transport utility you need without the crushing financial burden. When you saddle yourself with that $50,000 car loan, you're basically mortgaging your future freedom just for some immediate gratification. The rebellion demands you systematically reject this specific massive debt because it acts like a permanent anchor.
It's too big, too pervasive a trap to allow for exceptions based on, alleged utility or time saving.
I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that maximum age, minimum cost universally equals maximum freedom. I absolutely acknowledge the danger of perpetual debt. It's corrosive. But your position seems to ignore the total cost of ownership, the TCO. The issue with let's call it the 2007 Camry ideal, is that it brings in maintenance unpredictability and significant time loss. These are costs the rebellion's philosophy often seems to gloss over. If that older car needs frequent, unexpected repairs, the time you lose sitting at the mechanics, plus the frankly mental drain of it all, that has to be factored into the peace of mind equation. For someone whose income heavily depends on reliable transport, a more strategic purchase, maybe a certified pre-owned, low-mileage car that's already taken the biggest depreciation hit, could actually be a better capital investment than just outright refusal. You minimize the debt risk compared to new, but you maximize utility, and crucially, you preserve that time asset. Finding that strategic sweet spot, I argue, is fiscally smarter than a blanket no.
But even that sweet spot likely involves some monthly payment, doesn't it? A persistent drain pulling away from that ultimate goal of financial serenity. The rebellion's discipline is framed as necessary precisely because those seemingly minor monthly payments, added up across different things, represent a life spent constantly cycling in and out of debt, never quite reaching escape velocity. You're arguing for efficiency within the system, I think. The rebellion demands an escape from the system entirely. That debt payment, however small you make it, still dictates where you have to work and for how long. The older car, even with occasional repair bills, never lays claim to your future earnings in the same way.
Okay, I'd counter that the debt is only truly crippling as the asset isn't leveraged effectively. If that strategic monthly payment enables, say, significantly higher income, maybe a consultant lands better clients because they have reliable, presentable transport, then it's functionally different from financing a luxury watch, isn't it? It becomes more like a calculated business expense. The potential flaw I see in the systematic rejection framework is that it risks confusing a pure consumer liability, like status spending, with a potentially strategic capital investment, like necessary low depreciation transport. We need to focus on the function and the economic outcome, not just the mere presence of a payment.
Right, and this connects directly to the second major point, the systematic rejection of what the material calls lazy inflation, services that outsource basic self-reliance. Now, I understand your focus on time optimization, but the rebellion's argument against constant reliance on things like food delivery, it's about much more than just the money. It's about reclaiming a kind of self-mastery in everyday actions. The philosophy has a strong stoic element, It's about confronting waste disguised as convenience. If we start outsourcing every little task, meal prep, cleaning, maybe even short trips we could walk, we're essentially paying a premium for the privilege of doing less. My concern is that the systematic use of convenience, which you seem to advocate for strategically, might actually erode the very discipline and mental toughness needed to handle the bigger, more complex financial decisions that lead to real autonomy. I mean, if you can't master basic meal planning, how are you going to master complex investment strategies? Is there a connection there?
That's a powerful point about self-mastery, definitely. But we need to be clear, I think, on the difference between mastering a skill for its own sake and strategically allocating resources to achieve a specific goal. Self-reliance is, of course, admirable, but the discussion here is about the fastest, most effective route to financial freedom. That's the stated objective. So I'd frame the time spent preparing every single meal as potentially non-productive, almost mandatory labor, depending on your situation. If a high-earning professional spends, say, 2 hours a day just on meal logistics, shopping, prepping, cooking, cleaning, that could perhaps be outsourced for, let's say, $20. Now, if those 2 hours could instead be invested in a side project earning $150, then systematically refusing the delivery actually results in a net loss of $130 of progress towards autonomy. The rebellion, I worry, risks confusing constant activity, always being busy doing things yourself, with measurable progress towards the financial goal. And furthermore, all that constant busy work can lead to decision fatigue.
That's a real, though invisible, resource drain that can degrade the quality of the very high-level decision-making you need for financial success.
I think you might be underestimating the sheer depth of the conditioning, though. When you justify that $20 convenience, aren't you reinforcing the consumer mindset that says problems are solved by throwing money at them? The rebellion seems aimed at breaking that exact neural pathway. When you systematically refuse to pay for convenience, you're forced to innovate, perhaps plan better, develop more self-control. And those skills, planning, self-control, delayed gratification, they're indispensable for long-term financial security, which is inherently about saying no to easy debt and yes to building things slowly. That daily act of refusal, the material suggests, is the necessary training ground.
But the training has to be focused where it counts most, surely? Rejecting a brand new $50,000 car? That yields massive financial results. Okay. Refusing a $15 food delivery, it saves a tiny fraction of that amount while potentially consuming hours of your most valuable, non-renewable resource time, which could be leveraged for exponential returns elsewhere. My argument isn't against self-control at all. It's against the inefficient allocation of that self-control towards low-value targets. Strategic intentionality lets you focus your limited willpower on the big financial battles that really move the needle, not necessarily on whether you should chop your own vegetables tonight.
True wealth is owned quietly, not flashy, not worn on your sleeve. Status symbols are presented as primary traps designed for external validation, often hiding the grim reality of someone financially drowning. The insistence on systematic rejection here, designer labels, luxury watches, constant unnecessary tech upgrades, it's positioned as a prerequisite. You have to cut these things out to escape the consumer conditioning that relentlessly tells us our self-worth is tied to how we look or what we own. The author is blunt. Status doesn't pay the bills, it doesn't buy peace, it doesn't grant freedom. You basically have to surgically remove these appearances from your life to break free.
And I agree completely that spending money mainly to impress other people, especially people you don't even like, is the absolute definition of financial folly. Totally on board there. However, I do have to ask, is the blanket rejection of all professional appearance or all strategic technology acquisitions always practical, or even economically smart?
Look, if we're pursuing financial autonomy partly through professional income generation, which most people are, then presenting a certain level of professional polish or making strategic investments in necessary tools, say hire in tech that genuinely improves your workflow efficiency and reliability, is that really status or is it utility? If an investment in, let's say, professional presentation or better tools accelerates your career path and your income by 20%, isn't that a leveraged asset? Doesn't it actually achieve the goal of financial freedom faster than prioritizing pure austerity in every single category?
So, the debate for me is less about avoiding status altogether and more about making calculated decisions about utility and asset acquisition.
But utility needs a really strict definition here, doesn't it? And the material implies it rarely extends beyond the absolute minimum required functionality. Where do you draw that line between a necessary tool and a status symbol creeping in? If the previous model of your laptop, say, performs the core function perfectly well, then upgrading to the newest, shiniest premium model, that's not utility, is it? That's just submission to the upgrade cycle. The material seems to demand an unwavering refusal of anything that primarily appeals to vanity or societal expectation, because those are the exact hooks that pull people right back into the consumer machine.
Okay, but that unwavering refusal itself can create a different kind of drag, an economic drag. Think about professional needs connectivity, speed. If an entrepreneur insists on using, say, 5-year-old technology just to adhere strictly to the principle, they might save, $2,000 up front. But what if they lose hundreds of hours over the year due to slower processing or compatibility issues? That directly hits their income potential. That inefficiency becomes its own kind of financial anchor, potentially just as heavy as a small monthly payment might have been. My strategic approach allows for intentional acquisition, where the cost is demonstrably outweighed by an accelerated pace towards the actual goal, financial freedom.
But that accelerated pace potentially comes at the cost of remaining vulnerable to the very systems you claim you're trying to escape.
And, arguably,
Systematic rejection in all things risks achieving a kind of functional poverty faster than it achieves freedom.
All right, so to quickly summarize my position, the philosophy of the Buy Nothing Rebellion, as I interpret it, really holds that true, lasting financial freedom demands rigorous discipline. It requires the explicit, systematic rejection of these deeply ingrained financial traps, the car loans, the upgrade cycles, all the status symbols. Every deliberate no to meaningless consumption is framed as a decisive yes to a life of genuine peace and independence. Without that systematic refusal, the underlying conditioning just remains too powerful to truly break free from.
And my core perspective, wrapping up, remains that while the philosophical bedrock discipline, intentionality, is absolutely undeniable and valuable, the path to financial autonomy doesn't necessarily mandate the systematic rejection of all modern conveniences or strategic investments. Strategic consumption, when it's precisely aimed at optimizing time, energy, or professional effectiveness, isn't a compromise on the goal. It could be an equally intentional and often, I'd argue, a more accelerated path to achieving that ultimate freedom. The intentional choice itself, whether that choice is to reject or to strategically acquire, that's what defines autonomy for me.
It's clear, though, that both approaches fundamentally value self-discipline and a kind of radical independence over just passively consuming. They both demand deep self-reflection on, really, every dollar spent or not spent.
Absolutely, and the material, regardless of which approach one leans towards, serves as an excellent prompt, doesn't it? It encourages listeners to think deeply about where their own choices currently fall on that critical spectrum somewhere between maybe unwitting financial enslavement and the kind of strategic autonomy that can lead to genuinely intentional living and, hopefully, lasting serenity.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you're here, you're looking for that efficient path to being really well-informed. And today, we're tackling something that pushes back against, well, basically our entire modern way of life. It's the constant pressure, that subtle push towards consumerism. We're diving into a movement called the Buy Nothing Rebellion.
Right. And this deep dive, it's really about getting into the core arguments from our source material here. It frames this idea of, extreme intentional restraint, not just as a way to save money, but as a route to, well, total personal freedom, autonomy.
So it's not your typical budgeting advice, clipping coupons and that sort of thing. This sounds much more confrontational.
Exactly. Confrontation is a good word. The proponents of this rebellion, they want you to grasp this right away. Most financial advice is about optimization, right? How to spend better. This movement demands you confront the why behind the spending in the first place.
Okay, so what's the central idea then?
The absolute core premise is that the Buy Nothing Rebellion is not about being cheap. It's not about just hoarding cash for its own sake. It is explicitly, fundamentally about becoming free.
Free, okay.
Free. The authors argue that the cycle we all know, earning, spending, maybe owing this endless chase for the next thing, the upgrade. They frame it as a kind of sophisticated, systemic financial enslavement, one we mostly choose to participate in.
And why do we participate? What's their argument there?
Well, they argue it's conditioning.
Yeah.
From, day one, we're taught to equate buying stuff, high consumption, with progress and getting things instantly. That convenience, that equals success in our culture.
Yeah, you see that everywhere. If you could afford the fancy experience, the fastest delivery, the newest gadget,
Yeah.
society pats you on the back.
Right, and that external validation, that's the goal we end up chasing.
But that validation, according to this philosophy, is the trap itself.
Precisely. Those symbols of success, the nice car, the big trip, they often turn into financial anchors. We end up working harder, maybe sticking in jobs we don't even like.
Just to pay for the things we were told we needed to look successful.
Exactly. So the rebellion aims to just completely disrupt that cycle, to establish real independence.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's dig into the specific acts of rebellion they outline. And we should start where the source material does, right? Tackling what they see as the biggest single financial weight holding people down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the rebellion kicks off with a pretty bold move, declaring independence from what many see as essential, but what they call the biggest liability. We're talking about the car, specifically the obsession with new, constantly upgraded cars.
Yes, it's a really potent starting point because cars aren't just transport, are they? There's so much emotion, so much cultural status tied up in them. And then there's the sheer financial weight. The sources, they point out the average new car price in North America is now Well, it's over $50,000.
50,000. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge chunk of change for most people.
It's a massive anchor, unless you've got significant wealth already. And it's not just buying it, it's the ongoing commitment. The author uses this really strong phrase, calling the cycle of new car payments. They call it a form of indentured servitude.
Indentured servitude. That's powerful language. What do they mean by that exactly?
Well, they use that deliberately, I think, to kind of shock you into seeing the scale of the commitment. When you sign up for those high monthly payments, and the sources cite around $600 to $750 a month, often for 6, even 7 years,
Right.
you're essentially guaranteeing that a big slice of your work effort every single month isn't building your own wealth. It's just servicing this thing that's losing value. You're working for the bank, essentially. And it keeps you tied to needing that high income, even if the job makes you miserable.
Okay, but I have to push back a bit here, play devil's advocate for a listener maybe thinking this. People argue, a new car means reliability, peace of mind, modern safety features. That's important, especially with families. Is the author really saying ditch all that just to save money? Isn't that potentially risky?
That's a fair question, and it's one the author anticipates. They don't actually dismiss reliability or safety at all. Instead, they try to shift the focus. It's about the difference between what's necessary for function and safety versus what's just novelty or status.
Okay.
The rebellion isn't anti-car, it's anti-debt for cars. They advocate driving something reliable, safe, but crucially paid for. The author uses their own car as an example, a 2007 Toyota Camry. Paid off.
The 2007 Camry.
Yeah.
Right. So reliable gets you from A to B, safe enough, but zero debt attached.
Exactly. It does the job, it's functional, it's dependable.
Right.
But it carries no financial burden, no servitude.
So the key distinction is rebellion against financing assets that go down in value, not against having a safe vehicle.
Precisely. And they really hammer the financial mechanics. Let's just look at the numbers quickly. Say you take a $40,000 loan, 72 months, maybe 6% interest. You end up paying almost $7,500 just in interest. That's $750 a month payment. That's the servitude. Now, think about the opportunity cost. What if, instead of that payment, you drove that paid-off Camry and invested that $750 every month? Over those same 6 years, even with a pretty modest return, say 8%, you'd have nearly $70,000 built up.
$70,000 versus $7,500 paid out in interest, and a car now worth maybe half its original price.
Exactly. It completely reframes the car. It's not a measure of success anymore. It becomes a conscious choice. Immediate gratification and image versus long-term financial power.
So the philosophical shift is huge.
It's profound. A car should be a tool, a utility for transport, not this. Trophy for your ego. Constantly upgrading, the author argues, just shows you've bought into the corporate story that your worth is tied to how new your stuff is. The real rebellion is choosing function over flash, choosing freedom over the validation you think that shiny new car provides.
Okay, so if the new car is like the big physical anchor dragging you down, the next area of rebellion zeroes in on the, let's say, the psychological anchors. It's about the everyday spending we do, often status-driven, to kind of craft how we appear to the world.
Right. So this isn't just big-ticket items anymore. This is designer clothes, fancy watches, the latest sneakers, high-end jewelry, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Anything used primarily to project an image of affluence, often an image you can't really sustain financially. And the core motivation for rejecting this stuff is summed up in a phrase the author uses a lot. I'm not dressing for validation.
I'm not dressing for validation. That really cuts to the heart of it, doesn't it? It's about spending driven by wanting others to see you in a certain way.
Right.
Performance spending, like you said. Yeah, and the critique here is pretty sharp. It points to this cultural sickness, almost, where society seems to actively encourage people to look rich rather than putting in the work and discipline to actually be rich.
Which leads to that phrase they use. Financially drowning, but looking good doing it.
Perfect summary. People prioritize spending their cash flow. Can I make the minimum payment on this luxury bag rather than building actual capital? So they look amazing, totally put together, but financially, they're incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
One missed paycheck away from trouble.
But okay, let me ask this. How do you actually navigate that social pressure? It's real. You go into a professional setting, a family event. There often is an expectation, subtle or not, about how you present yourself, your clothes, your watch, success. Right?
Yeah.
Isn't rejecting that whole game potentially limiting socially or even in business?
That's the core of the psychological battle, isn't it? The author's response is pretty uncompromising. They argue that if you give in to that pressure, you're essentially trading your financial independence for someone else's fleeting approval.
Approval versus independence.
The rebellion demands you redefine success for yourself. True wealth, they insist, isn't worn. It's owned quietly. It's the capital you build silently, the assets you hold securely. And ultimately, it's your inner peace of mind. That's the real wealth. It's a kind of security that no creditor can ever touch.
So it's not on your wrist, it's on your balance sheet.
Exactly. And this ties back so strongly to older philosophies like Stoicism. In a way, this whole rebellion feels like an economic application of Stoic ideas.
How so?
Well, think about it. Pursuing simplicity, mastering your reaction to external appearances, fiercely guarding your independence from others' opinions. These are all core Stoic tenets, just translated into dollars and cents.
Right. The Stoics thought that external things, wealth, status, possessions, are indifference. They can't guarantee happiness or inner peace.
And this movement applies that directly to your bank account. If you're constantly seeking validation through buying things, you're making yourself dependent on what other people think. And that dependency is the exact opposite of the autonomy this rebellion is chasing. It's like a self-built prison made of appearances.
The bottom line is brutally simple.
Yeah. At the end of the day, status doesn't pay the mortgage. It doesn't buy you genuine peace. And it definitely doesn't grant you freedom. Every dollar you spend chasing how things look is a dollar you didn't invest in building real, quiet, solid wealth.
Okay, so we've covered the big visible symbols, the car, the clothes, the status items. The next rebellion shifts focus a bit, looking at experiences. Specifically, the kind often financed by debt. The luxury vacation, moving from owning things to owning moments, but sometimes with the same financial chains attached.
Yeah, and the language here is, again, quite stark. These trips, particularly the ones put on credit cards or financed somehow, they're called financial hangovers.
Financial hangovers. Ouch.
Right. The idea is the pleasure, the high of the experience is temporary. It fades. But the debt, the stress that comes with it, that sticks around long after the tan lines disappear.
And the justification we use is often so, slippery, isn't it?
Yeah.
The source material really calls out how these expensive trips get framed, even to ourselves, as necessary mental health breaks or self-care.
Exactly. We tell ourselves, I deserve this, I need this break from the high-pressure job. But often that high-pressure job is needed precisely because we have these expensive lifestyle habits, like needing costly breaks. It's a cycle.
A self-perpetuating cycle of earning to escape the earning.
That's the critical loop they want you to see and break. The core argument is you can't genuinely buy peace of mind on a beautiful beach somewhere if you're simultaneously dreading the massive credit card bill waiting for you when you get back home.
The debt cancels out the relaxation.
Completely. The stress of the bill outweighs the temporary relief from the exotic view. It's just self-defeating.
But again, playing devil's advocate, isn't travel important? Aren't those experiences, those memories, valuable in themselves? And if you wait until you have thousands saved up in cash for a big trip, maybe you'll be too old or circumstances change, isn't there value in seizing the moment?
It's a valid point about the value of experiences, but the rebellion isn't really anti-travel. It's anti-debt finance travel. It's about the method of payment and the mindset behind it.
Okay.
The author redefines true luxury. It's not the fancy resort you put on a credit card. True luxury is peace of mind. It's knowing your financial foundation is solid, that your life is yours, owned outright, free from the constant pressure of servicing past pleasures.
So it flips treating yourself completely.
Right.
Instead of treating yourself to debt.
You treat yourself to discipline, and the discipline builds the freedom. The solution they advocate is straightforward, but it requires patience. You save up first, then you pay in cash, then you indulge.
It becomes an exercise in delayed gratification.
Exactly. And that exercise, that virtue of patience, is key. Financial freedom in this view is directly linked to your level of self-discipline. By waiting, saving, paying cash, you're proving mastery over that impulse for immediate gratification. And that mastery is the mechanism that builds long-term freedom. It also means when you finally take that trip, you can actually enjoy it, stress-free. It shifts from being an indulgence you're paying off to a reward you truly own.
And the implication is, if you can't afford to save up for that luxury trip, maybe the escape you actually need isn't a beach resort, but an escape from the debt that makes you feel like you need the escape in the first place.
Precisely. Tackle the underlying financial stress first. The ultimate escape is from debt, not just from your daily routine. All right, moving on to the fourth major act of rebellion. This one turns the focus outwards towards the corporations and the systems that drive so much consumption. We're talking about escaping the upgrade trap and the whole cycle of planned obsolescence.
Ah, yes, the endless churn of technology. This feels very relevant today. It's a critique of the system itself, right? Where companies deliberately design products, either to break down or just feel outdated through software tweaks or minor feature additions.
Precisely to keep you buying, to keep you on the hook. It's a kind of mass conditioning, really, all designed to fuel constant corporate growth, often directly at the expense of your personal savings.
And the source material challenges the basic assumption that the latest is always necessary.
Exactly. The author gives a really simple, relatable example from their own work. I don't need another lens on my camera. The point being, the current tool works perfectly fine for its intended function.
Functionality first. That seems to be a recurring theme. If your phone still makes calls and sends texts reliably, if your laptop still runs the software you need, why feel compelled to replace it just because a slightly shinier version exists?
Because the upgrade culture is incredibly powerful and pervasive. It's driven by nonstop marketing, those big launch events, the social pressure. It's all designed to make you feel like you're falling behind if you don't have the newest thing. And this keeps people paying again and again, often for very minor incremental improvements.
And there are hidden costs, too, beyond just the price tag.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the time cost alone, transferring all your data, learning a new interface, getting rid of the old device responsibly, plus the environmental impact of all that electronic waste. But the primary cost, the one this rebellion focuses on, is financial.
Let's just think about that. Say someone upgrades your phone every 2 years, spending maybe $1,000 each time. If you do that from, say, age 25 to 65, that's 20 phones. This is $20,000 just gone on incremental upgrades.
Exactly. And now, apply the opportunity cost again, that $1,000 every 2 years. If that same money was invested instead, even conservatively, over 40 years, the power of compounding would make it a huge sum. But the upgrade cycle ensures that money stays flowing out of your pocket and into corporate coffers instead of working for you. You're constantly destroying potential future wealth for present novelty.
So resisting that urge, the simple act of not upgrading your perfectly functional tech, that gets reframed here. It's not just being frugal or maybe a bit behind the times.
No, it becomes a conscious act of rebellion, a deliberate choice to opt out of that consumer conditioning cycle. It's you asserting rational choice. My needs are met over a programmed desire for the new. It's saying, I won't participate in this churn of waste and manufactured dissatisfaction just because you tell me I should. There's a kind of peace in finding sufficiency.
Okay, that brings us to the fifth and final point of resistance they highlight. And this one feels maybe the most direct, almost blunt. It's about refusing to pay for convenience when, according to the author, that convenience stems poorly from laziness. The prime target here, food delivery services.
Yeah, this one definitely hits close to home for a lot of people in the modern world. It targets a really ingrained habit, paying huge markups for ease, especially for basic tasks. The author is very straightforward. Stop paying for food delivery, especially when the place is, easily walkable or a short drive away.
They even coined a term for it, which I found interesting. Lazy inflation.
Lazy inflation. It's evocative, isn't it? It captures the idea that we're paying this massive, often kind of hidden premium. You got the delivery fees, the service fees, sometimes surge pricing, plus the expectation of a tip, all for the privilege of basically doing less, of outsourcing a simple act of physical effort.
And that premium adds up fast.
Oh, incredibly fast. Let's break it down. Say you order a meal that costs $25 directly from the restaurant. By the time you add, let's say, a $4 delivery fee, a $3 service fee, maybe a $5 tip, that's an extra $12.
Wow, that's nearly a 50% markup.
Exactly. Almost 50% more, just so you didn't have to walk a few blocks or drive a few minutes. Now imagine someone does that 3 times a week. That's $36 a week, purely in that lazy inflation premium. Over a year, that's more than $1,800. Just vanished into the convenience economy.
It seems small each time, but when you look at the cumulative effect,
Yeah,
it's a significant financial leak, just draining away potential savings or investments.
and the argument here goes beyond just the money. It touches on self-discipline again. The rebellion suggests that if you consistently pay extra just to avoid a tiny bit of physical effort, you're actually training yourself to always seek the path of least resistance. And that habit can bleed into other areas of your life, including bigger financial decisions.
Now, it's important to add the nuance here, right?
Yeah.
The source material isn't saying never use delivery.
Absolutely critical point. The author explicitly makes exceptions. This isn't aimed at people who genuinely rely on these services. Individuals with physical disabilities, people who are sick, the elderly, for them it's a necessity. But the argument is firmly directed at the vast majority of able-bodied people who are paying these huge premiums purely out of complacency or habit.
And the challenge, the call to action, is pretty stark. Grow your own food or get your own food.
Yeah, that phrase really brings it home. It connects this seemingly small daily act back to the bigger picture of self-reliance and autonomy. The underlying message is, if you can't even manage the basic task of feeding yourself without paying a massive convenience tax, are you truly independent? Reclaiming that simple act, getting your own food, becomes another way to integrate financial discipline into your everyday life, reinforcing the whole rebellion.
Okay, so we've walked through these 5 specific areas of resistance. The debt-free car, rejecting status symbols, avoiding debt for vacations, opting out of endless upgrades, and cutting the lazy tax on food delivery. When you pull back and look at all these no's, these refusals, what's the bigger picture? What's the unified philosophy holding it all together?
Well, what emerges isn't just a random collection of saving tips. It's actually a very coherent structure, a whole philosophy of life. The Buy Nothing Rebellion, when you synthesize it, seems to stand on 3 main pillars. It's a call to rigorous discipline, it's a pathway towards genuine freedom, and it demands a deep commitment to intentional living.
Intentional living, meaning every spending decision or decision not to spend has to be deliberate, has to pass a test.
Precisely. It's about consciously choosing where your resources, your time, your money, your energy actually go. And every time you exercise that restraint, every time you say no based on your principles, you're effectively creating this non-monetary currency.
Yeah, currency of
Autonomy, that's the concept. Each dollar you deliberately withhold from consumption that doesn't align with your true goals, it becomes like a vote for your own independence, a brick in the wall protecting your freedom. You're actively taking power back from corporations, from lenders, from societal pressure, and investing it in your own life. Saying no today enables a much bigger yes to the life you actually want later on.
And this whole approach, it really clashes head-on with so much of modern culture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Our culture rewards speed, constant activity, visible signs of success.
Absolutely. It fundamentally challenges that modern equation where constant activity, buying, replacing, upgrading somehow equals progress, and where how much you spend is taken as a measure of how successful you are. The rebellion argues that a lot of that consumer activity is just busy work. It keeps you on the financial hamster wheel. True progress, in this view, is quieter. It's discipline saving. It's wealth compounding silently. It's accumulating peace of mind. It's a totally different definition of progress.
And it feels like it strips away a lot of the emotion tied up in buying things, replacing it with something more rational.
Very much so. The source material itself sums it up nicely as a kind of stoic, minimalist, and deeply rational creed. It's about finding the richness in simplicity, recognizing the dignity and self-restraint, and ultimately pursuing the kind of serenity that only comes from true structural independence, financial independence, building a life that you genuinely own instead of one that's constantly being rented, financed, or borrowed against.
That's structural integrity. That sounds like the ultimate luxury they're aiming for.
I think that's exactly right. And that brings us neatly to the ultimate goal, which the author captures in this really powerful statement about freedom. It's like the guiding principle for every decision within this rebellion framework. Every time I say no to something that doesn't build my wealth, I'm saying yes to the life I actually want.
That's a potent reframe. It's not just about denial or deprivation. It's about affirmation, proactively choosing your desired future.
Exactly. Using discipline not just as a shield, but as a tool to actively design the life you want.
Okay, that's a powerful idea to leave everyone with. We've seen how the real cost of just keeping up appearances or paying for convenience can be way higher than the sticker price when you factor everything in.
Absolutely. So maybe one final thought, a provocation for you to consider after this deep dive.
Yeah.
If true luxury really is what the source material claims, pure peace of mind, then ask yourself, how much financial debt, how much of your future freedom and autonomy are you currently willingly trading away just for the appearance of success today?
That's a challenging question.
It is. And maybe try to identify just one specific area we discussed, the car, the vacation, the status item, the daily convenience, where right now the cost of keeping up appearances or the cost of ease might actually be outweighing your financial peace. Just recognizing that specific point of friction, that point of misalignment. That could be the crucial first step towards reclaiming your own version of freedom.